Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our study of Dante's Inferno to Canto 13, Circle 7, round number 2, the violent against self, that is to say, suicides. Without question, one of the most difficult of the cantos of all of the Divine Comedy to read. Without question, some of the most amazing poetry that you'll ever read is here now contained in this compelling chapter, canto poem, Canto 13. Now, if you haven't been following our stuff, they're available at learnstrong.net in the AP folder. My assumption is that you've been working with us from the Iliad all the way through to St. Augustine's Confessions. We have also given guided lectures already over Cantos 1 through 12. Let's review those quickly. In Canto 1, of course, we are at April the 7th, 1300. 35 years old Dante is, lost in a dark wood of error. He discovers Virgil. Virgil in Canto 2 will, after the invocation of the Muse by Dante the poet, tell Dante the pilgrim, Beatrice is who sent me. And Dante will say, I'm ready to go. In Canto 3, we have the inscription of hell, abandon hope all ye who enter here, and the uncommitted. In Canto 4, we have limbo, and circle number 1, the unbaptized pagans, like Homer, like Virgil, and of course, Aristotle. In Canto 5, circle 2, we have the jacked lovers. Dido, of course, is there, but Francesca will tell her story about she and Paolo. In Canto 6, we have circle 3, the gluttons, and Chaco, and the prophecy of Florence, and final judgment comments made. In Canto 7, we have circle 4, the prodigals and the avaricious. We're going to come back to that issue of the prodigals here in Canto 13, so hold on to that idea. And they're pushing rocks around, unable to speak. In circle 5 of Canto 7, we have the marsh Styx, the wrathful and the sullen. In Canto 8, we have the Styx, and Filippi Argente, and then we will have the city of Dis. In Canto 9, we have the gates of Dis opened, and now we're ready for Circle 6, the heretics. In Canto 10, we have Dante's conversation with Farinata and Cavalcante. In Canto 11, we have Virgil giving kind of an overview of all of hell, the map of hell, that is derived in large measure from the study of Aristotle. And finally, in Canto 12, we have Circle 7, Round 1. Remember, we have 3 different rounds or rings of Circle 7. We have the Minotaur, the Centaurs, and we have the violent against neighbors, and the river of blood that's provided there. Okay, let's turn now to Canto 13. Again, our hope is that you're reading this material on your own and then using me as a reference. Again, our learning theory is the attempt to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We have our 3 levels of annotation, of course, guiding questions. What does the text say? Level 1, what does the text mean? Level 2, 2A, messages, themes. 2B, we're concentrating at the rhetorical level on symbolism and irony. There's going to be a lot of it here. We're also going to be asking at level 2B about Dante as poet, politician, and philosopher, and we'll have much to say about that as well. Finally, at level 3, we ask, how can I relate this information to first of all, at 3A, the text we've already studied in AP and other texts as well, from the Iliad all the way up through St. Augustine's Confessions. And then finally, how can I relate to this information personally? I think this will be compelling reading for us, I hope. Let's do a quick brief summary of Canto 13, Circle 2, again, second ring, the suicides. They are as trees, but trees with feeling. Dante, in fact, will break off one of the branches, and the tree will ask, why did you do that? Why did you hurt me? Notice, in real life, the individual hurts himself or herself and takes his or her own life. And now in the afterlife, we'll ask, why did you hurt me? We'll have, in fact, a conversation with Pierre de Vigne, the tragic story of a man who was very much loyal to Frederick II and then was accused of being a traitor, and he couldn't live with it, and so he took his own life. And then he asks Dante, will you please tell my story so people will know that I wasn't a traitor? The significance of this is going to be compelling because the same thing will have happened to Dante, which is, I think, why Dante the Pilgrim can't speak so easily about this, and Virgil has to do most of the talking. Virgil does most of the interchange here, not Dante the Pilgrim, and I think there's a reason for that, because Dante the Pilgrim, of course, himself, Dante the poet, was exiled, right, and has to deal with that one. Finally, we have 2 who show up who are spendthrifts. They're prodigals. They've wasted their money. They're not suicides, but they end up in this circle, because worse than the prodigals of the fourth circle, Canto 7, this is a sin for them of willful spendthrift, losing of money, and therefore not just weakness, but rather conscious decision. Okay, let's go now to the actual Canto 13, and let's just read this. In our Pinsky translation, we have the Italian on the effacing page. Notice that the word non, the Italian word for not, is repeated 3 times. Let's see how Robert Pinsky plays the same game here, right? Nisus had not yet reached the other side. Notice we begin with negations. When we move forward into woods unmarked by any path, the leaves not green. Notice again all of these knots. The leaves not green, earth hue. The boughs not smooth, knotted, and even the word knotted sounds like knot, and crooked forked. No fruit, but poisoned thorns. These trees that will ultimately, we realize, become the suicides. Of the wild beasts near Siena and Cornado, these are an area called Marma. It's the wildest area in Dante's life of the area around Florence. That hate fields worked by men with plow and harrow, none infests thickets that are as rough or dense as this. In other words, it's a really dense kind of situation. Notice we began our poem in a dark wood of error, and here now in Canto 13, we've got a different kind of woods, only the trees are alive. Here, the repellent harpies make their nest. Now you'll remember these harpies, these disgusting part bird, part woman. We're back to another mythological creature that's part human, part animal. Well, you'll remember this from Aeneid, Book 3, lines 210 through 57, right? You'll remember this through 257. Here the repellent harpies make their nests, who drove the Trojans from the Strophades, as we said in Aeneid 3, with dire announcements of the coming woe. You'll remember that one of those harpies made the pronouncement to Aeneas how terrible it was all going to be. You're going to eat your plates, you'll remember, right? They have broad wings, a human neck and face, clawed feet, and swollen feathered bellies. They caw their lamentations in the eerie trees. If you commit suicide in Dante's Inferno, the harpies are the ones who visit you and visit grief upon you. Here, the good master began. Notice Virgil. Before you go further, be aware that now you are in this, the second ring, and so you shall be until the horrible sand of Canto 14 and the next circle. Look well, for here one sees things which in words would be incredible. It's a brilliant line. It's a brilliant translation of Pinsky. Look well, because what you're about to see defies anything in the real world. It's so disturbing. On every side, I heard wailing voices grieve. Yet I could not see anyone there to wail, and so I stopped, bewildered. And then notice the repetitions of the word belief. This is a compelling way for Dante, I think, as poet, to say, the chief sin of suicide is the inability to no longer believe, to have faith, either in oneself or in the world that one inhabits. And that makes it the most tragic of sins, right? Of faults. I believe, my guide believed, that in my belief, the voices I heard from somewhere in among the grove came somehow from people who were hiding places. And therefore the master said, it's almost like he's testing him in some way, if you remove a little branch from any one of these pieces of foliage around us, the thoughts you have will also be broken off. I reached my hand a little in front of me and twisted off one shoot of a mighty thorn bush, and it moaned. Now this is going to remind us of Polydorus when Aeneas plays this same game in Aeneid 3, line 22 through 48. You'll remember that one, right? When he's trying to dig to set up his new site, and all of a sudden the tree starts speaking. We're going to get the same thing here. And it moaned, "Why do you break me?" Now the brilliance of this poetry is that you can imagine that the soul is going to ask the same question when the body decides to destroy itself in the form of suicide. It is compelling. Why do you break me? Then, after it had grown darker with blood, it began again and moaned, "Why have you torn me? Have you no pity?" Then, these three questions, brilliantly constructed, of course, are the questions that the soul would have to ask when the body would try to take its own life. Once, continuing now, the tree speaks, once we were men, now we are stumps of wood. Your hand should show some mercy, though we have been the souls of serpents. And then we get this amazing epic simile. As flames spurt at one side of a green log oozing sap at the other end, hissing with escaping air, so that branch flowed with words and blood together. At which my hand released the tip, and I stood like one in dread. In other words, I can't believe what I just did. These trees are alive, and they're alive because they took their own life. And this is how they are restored in the afterlife. Dante is at his poetic, allegorical, brilliant moment of poetry here with this one. Dante can't speak. So it will be Virgil now that will speak and carry on much of the speaking now for quite some time. Had he been able to credit or comprehend before, O wounded spirit, my sage replied, what he had witnessed only in my verses, his hand would never have performed this deed against you. In other words, he should have known better than to do this, because if he had known my poetry well, he would have known all about Polydorus and the Aeneid 3 passage we were referencing at lines 20 through 48. But the fact, belief refuses, compelled me, though it grieves me thus to prompt him. In other words, I needed for him to actually go through this actual process of breaking a branch off. By the way, we should point out that as well in the Aeneid, you'll remember that before Aeneas can go into the underworld, he has to break off, of course, the golden bough and all of that, and if it comes easy, then of course it's going to work out. If it doesn't come easy, blah, 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 and all of that. We get the same kind of word picture going on here as well, right? But tell him who you are. In other words, Virgil is saying to Dante, because Dante can't speak. He's so blown away by this, he can't speak. Tell him who you are, so that his praises may make amends by freshening your fame when he returns again to the world above, as he is permitted. In other words, tell him who you are, Virgil says, and he'll go back to the world and he will tell the world your story. And by the way, now we're going to get this story, the broken stem. It's a compelling idea. The broken stem. This is what happens when someone tragically decides to end his or her existence. It's a broken stem. Think of it. It's a tree that was growing, and then all of a sudden, it's not growing anymore. Beautifully constructed in the afterlife. Then that soul becomes a tree, which is, of course, going to be torn apart by harpies or inhabited by harpies. The broken stem, by the way, this individual, this voice, is Pierre della Vigna, who was Frederick II's advisor, tragically accused of treason, of being a traitor, and blinded, and then exiled. Of course, sounding very similar to some of the things that will have happened to Dante. Not blinded physically, but we might say blinded with rage. He was so upset. I've shown you pictures of Dante, and of course, if you haven't seen pictures of Dante, Google image this and see. And almost always, he's frowning, he's wretchedly mad. We're going to have a story now from Della Vigna. The broken stem, line 52. Your words have so much sweetness, he says to Virgil. In other words, you're such an amazing poet, you convinced me to speak. Your words have so much sweetness, they contrive to draw me out of silence. I am enticed to talk a little while. May it not prove burdensome to you. I hope that I don't make you too sad. I am he who possessed both keys to Frederick's heart, and I turned either, unlocking and locking with so soft a twist, I kept his secrets from almost any other. To this, my glorious office, I stayed so true, I lost both sleep and life. I worked so hard to take care of Frederick II. The harlot that never takes its whore's eyes from Caesar's retinue, that is to say, envy. The common fatal vice of courts. Here's political Dante at his best. You want to know what ruins political courts? It's all of this envy that goes on. Inflamed all minds against me, and they inflamed so inflamed Augustus, he calls Frederick II in kind of courtly style, Augustus, that the honors I claimed in gladness were converted into pain. My success was my ruin. They got angry, they got jealous and envious of me, and they started to spread rumors about me. My mind, he says, once this happened, in its disdainful temper, assumed dying would be a way to escape disdain, making me treat my juster self unjustly. Two observations here. He says, you know, I thought maybe suicide was a way for me to escape and all of this, because I was in despair. But he says, in the end, my juster self, my soul, was treated unjustly. And by this tree's strange roots, I swear again, line 70, I never betrayed my Lord, who was so worthy of honor. If you return, he asks a request of Dante. Again, Dante the Pilgrim saying nothing, remarkably silent here. If you return to the world above, either of you, please comfort my memory, still prostrate from the blow that envy gave. And now we know who the whore he was talking about was envy, right? Notice the same injustice happened to Dante, which may explain why he doesn't speak. The poet, Virgil, waited a moment and then said to me, since he is silent, don't waste the time you have, but speak and ask him what you wish. And you question him, then ask what you discern would satisfy me. I cannot, because of pity that feels my heart. Notice the genius. Early on, pity leads to swooning and fainting. Now, Dante doesn't faint. He just can't speak. The tragedy of suicide is that those remaining can't speak. Lost for words. Devastated. And of course, we'll ask at 3B, if you've ever had this tragic experience, especially when it's someone young, it's a devastation. You can't talk. And Dante here, the Pilgrim, he can't talk. We're in powerful poetry here. Let's just admit that, right? Therefore, my gentle guide began, line 80. For this man, freely to do the thing you say, imprisoned spirit, tell him if you can, and if it pleases you, in just what way the soul is bound in knots. Notice how the word knot, N-O-T, K-N-O-T-S, is bound in knots like these. Give word also if any soul could be set free from members such as these. Tell us, in other words, what it's like in the afterlife after you have committed suicide. What happens to the soul? And now, notice this spirit is going to speak, this tree. It puffed air hard, and soon that exultation became a voice. You shall be answered briefly, then it uttered. When the fierce soul, notice it's a fierce soul, has quit the fleshly case, it tore itself from. Notice it's a tearing, it's a rending. Minos sends it down to the seventh depth, here to the seventh circle. It falls into this wooded place. Again, lost in the wood of error comes to mind. It's very possible that Dante the poet is telling us that Dante the Pilgrim was engaged in serious despair when Virgil showed up in the dark wood of error. Minos sends it down to the seventh depth. It falls to this wooded place, no chosen spot, but where fortune flings it in. And there it sprouts like a grain of spelt to shoot up as a sapling, then a wild plant. In other words, when the soul arrives, Minos throws it down here in the ground randomly, and it grows up a wild plant. And then the harpies, feeding on the foliage, create pain, and an outlet for the pain as well. We too shall come like the rest, each one to get his cast-off body at the final judgment, but not for us to dwell within again. In other words, we don't get a body. We're not reunited with our body at the last judgment, for justice must forbid having what one has robbed itself of. In other words, if you commit suicide, you rob yourself. This is a form of thievery. And because of that, your soul cannot be reunited with the body in the afterlife. For justice must forbid having what one has robbed oneself of. Still, here we shall drag them. And through the mournful wood our bodies will be hung, with everyone fixed on the thorn bush of its wounding shade. In other words, in the after the final judgment, where our bodies will be hung on the very trees that we are ourselves. It is a brilliant word picture. If you take your own life, you rob your body of its ability to have its soul in its afterlife. To that degree, somehow distanced. Dante the poet says, We both were still attentive. By the way, notice the word still that keeps getting used in this. That is to say, suicide leads to a kind of tragic stillness. We both were still attentive when it was done, thinking it might have more to say to us when. Now another interruption, just like Cavalcante and Farinata in the earlier Canto 10, right? When an uproar surprised us, just as when, and we had another simile, just as when a hunter mindful of wild boar in the chase suddenly hears the beasts and crashing brush. In other words, there's this sound, and all of a sudden a couple of people show up, a couple of souls show up. There on our left, notice it's the left, not the right, there on our left came two at a desperate pace, naked, torn, so hard-pressed they seemed to crash headlong through every tangle the wood contained. They're running and they're getting caught on the trees that are in fact the suicides. Now, these are not suicides. Rather, these are a couple of people who were spendthrifts. They threw their money away willfully and allowed for their life to be ruined, one of them even allowing himself to be killed so he wouldn't have to enjoy poverty, right? The one in front cried. By the way, this is a man named Arcano da Scaricia, and in 1288, we're told, he permitted himself to be killed instead of having to live the life of a pauper. The one in front cried, "Come now, come in a rush, O death." In other words, they want to die. The other, this is Jacopo, he dies in 1239. He'll be mentioned here in a little bit later. Jacopo da Santo Andrea. And we're told about him that he died in 1239. Historians tell us this. He squandered an amazing fortune and ended up dying completely without anything. Both of these sins, or both of these individuals, sins of spendthrift, prodigal behavior. But it's conscious. It's not just because of weakness. They make a conscious decision. The other